All right, we are live. Anthony, thank you so much for giving up some time today to be on this show. I really appreciate it. And I know when executives take time off, I certainly value that. And so thank you for being here, for being our guest on Tea Talks. And I just love for you now, just introduce yourself to the audience. I did a long bio, but it's best coming from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah. So for me, I'll talk about kind of like coming to Minnesota. I'm from West Virginia originally. I
Hmm.
got to Minnesota via football, played football for the Minnesota Vikings for
Oh,
a couple of years. Yeah. And so
wow.
eventually left the Vikings, went out to the East Coast to get a couple of graduate degrees, got engaged with a large ministry out there where I was a youth leader, became director and youth pastor of the large church out there. Eventually, over years, decided to go to Minnesota to start a church. And while I was here in the Minneapolis area, I was deemed disconnected to the community. So I got engaged to a couple of nonprofits and I just loved the work. I was working for
Mhm.
Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge, which is focused on alcoholism and drug addiction. I left there and went to the United Way, which was a great job. I really got engaged with the community. It helped me understand a lot about the disparities and lack of access within the community. Uh,
Mhm.
and then I got headhunted over to the American Cancer Society, which was a perfect fit for me. So, still in school, the NFL actually helped pays for most of my education. So I've got like three masters, and I'm currently getting my doctorate. As long
Oh,
as they're
wow.
paying, I'm gonna keep going. But lastly, I'm a father of seven, and so
Yes.
we're doing good right now by the grace of God.
That's awesome. I'm so glad I asked you to really reintroduce yourself beyond the bio because you are first a minister and then part of the Cancer Society. That's really interesting. So you began in youth ministry and then got into this situation where you began to work with nonprofits, seeing the work, seeing the inequities, seeing all of these,
Yes,
things that would pull at the heart of a man of God for sure,
yes,
and somehow ended up at American Cancer Society. So wow, I when I think of the American Cancer Society, right, the things that come to my mind is, solutions, cancer, science, research. But I never really put hope. And it sounds weird, right? Because you're thinking, what are solutions? But I never tied hope in. And I thought it was interesting, which is why I wanted to talk to you because I saw that faith background. I just did a speech a couple of weeks ago for one of our events called The Power of Hope. And it was to cancer, survivors and thrivers. And I really want to speak and get your perspective on it. So, can you share some examples of how hope plays a significant role in the cancer journey for patients and their families?
absolutely. So I'll give some context for me. My sister currently is a breast cancer battler. She's right now fighting the fight. And so she's having surgery on the 17th of next month. So my family is praying consistently for her to be healed. And so just is something that currently my family is wrestling with as well. I've had a grandfather who I never met pass away from cancer, grandmother who had cancer as well, an aunt who had cancer. So cancer has been relatively prevalent in my family. And so for me, it's been interesting to see the dynamic of how cancer impacts lives, not only in my family, but broadly. An example for me is when I took over this role as the now vice president of the American Cancer Society for the area of Minnesota. Um, I had to build a board from scratch. And being in fundraising, I knew that one of the primary indicators that results in the best outcomes for board success or even development is passion. Obviously, you need to have the experience, the connections, the networks, but passion was primarily what the attribute I was looking for. And as I was reconstituting this board, I connected to an individual named Jeff Mader.
Mhm.
Jeff Mader, who at the time when I connected to him was a stage 4 cancer, kidney cancer survivor. He was fortunate enough to have an experimental drug that he was able to take, which is another conversation we
Yeah.
could have
Yes.
another day.
Yes. Yes.
But because he had access to that drug, his lifespan has gone right now 5 years beyond when he, according to the statistics, should have passed away. And so
Right.
as I look at Jeff, he's a man of passion. He eventually retired from his job, and now he's currently the board chair of our current board here in Minnesota. And so he connected to another man of God before he connected to me, and he thought it was serendipitous that me coming as a pastor just after he had this conversation about his purpose. He
Yes.
felt like that was like confirmation for him. And he's not really a religious man, but he felt God was doing something. So as I look at Jeff, someone who has an experimental drug experience and is actually working exceptionally well, he's now started almost a side endeavor to raise resources for cancer research. He's part of a group called CIOs versus Cancer. And because he now has purpose, passion, and now he has hope, he's looking for a cure.
Right.
And so looking at his life, a lot of people I've seen when they being diagnosed, they become recluse, they withdraw, they get scared, which is normal.
Right.
But he's pushed against that, and he's inspired me and others because he not only has a hope that he wants to live longer and he's hoping that there's a cure in his lifetime, but he hasn't taken a step back. He's continued to live. He's engaged in his family's life. He's spending time with his friends. He's still doing the things that you would want to do even without a diagnosis. So looking at him with the hope of a cure and how he's living his life, regardless if the cure comes in his lifetime or not, it gives you that motivation and understanding regarding hope being a confident, favorable expectation for his personal life. So in that regard, I see hope as intrinsic to not only overcoming, but actually living vibrantly after a diagnosis of cancer.
Wow, that you just said just so much right there. Obviously, Wayne just said, we join you in prayer for your sister, for sure. And it's just so interesting that you said serendipitously the cancer role, American Cancer Society job, fell in your lap a little bit, but then your background is in I mean, you have people in your background with cancer. When you had this, when you were given this role, was your sister at that time diagnosed?
She wasn't.
Wow.
Yeah, she actually was just diagnosed 4 months ago this year. I've been in the job two and a half years. And so this is relatively new for her. And I mean, we can get, like I said, there's a lot we could talk about, but during the pandemic, people couldn't get in and get screened.
Yes, I know.
Screening is how we do a better job at winning, right? And
yes.
So a lot of people couldn't get in for screening, and she kind of missed her opportunity. And then come out of the pandemic, there was a delay in how long people had to wait in order to get in. She finally got in, and it was probably more developed than what we would want it to be, obviously. And so right now I've been able to help her out with just advice and tools. But ultimately she's in Maryland. But nevertheless, she's trying to get the best care she possibly can. She has a support system. I've tried to communicate to her about, biomarker testing, which is important in the process. So, and then obviously, like I said earlier, we're praying, and thank you for your prayers as well.
Absolutely. Peter's a scientist, but he's also a man of God too. He just says, so much powerful inspiration for your journey, God's plan at work. I don't know if you want to share. Well, it's not that important, but I was just curious as to what stage your sister was at.
Yeah, so that's the thing. She hasn't told me, but I'm thinking she's anywhere between stage 2 and stage 3, just so you know.
Okay. Yeah. That's your thinking. But as you shared though, the gentleman with the stage 4 kidney cancer, right? He's still here. 5 years, after what they said that he would live. And I speak to a lot of I had a panel of 4 cancer survivors this past Monday. Many of them are actively metastatic. They're stage 4, but they've been 7, 8, 9 years out.
Yeah.
So you're with the American Cancer Society. All the trials that are going around. The research is out there. Yeah. Obviously, though, when it hits home, when it hits your family, it's all of that goes through the door. But I really do thank you for sharing that. And I did have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
This always, intrigues me, especially if I'm talking to someone from a faith background. You mentioned the gentleman on your board and about his purpose.
Yeah.
Do you think in just you using your faith head and your American Cancer Society head, do you feel when someone is walking in their purpose, then their calling, their gifting, their reason for being here, do you feel that somehow impacts their recovery, their journey, their survivorship?
Yes, absolutely. So this gentleman who I told you about, he
Mm-hmm.
before he met me, he had a conversation with another individual who was in the southern part of the country, and the man just kind of declared to him, like, God has a purpose, and so he interpreted that
Mm-hmm.
as, okay, there's something I have the capacity to do, only I can do, and I need to endure to do it. And so
Right.
when you have, obviously, like when you have purpose, well, I mean, we talk about Rick Warren's book, Purpose Driven Life,
Right.
right? I mean, one of the
Right.
highest selling books of all time. I mean, purpose gives you the motivation sometimes when you don't feel motivated, right? And so,
Mhm.
but what makes him unique is he also is very disciplined, right? And that's what's helpful, because when you have discipline, then when the motivation is not there, that can kind of help you through some of the storms you go through.
That's
Um,
true.
but yeah, I believe purpose helped his attitude. There's a lot of people that get into a rut and they don't go to treatment, right? They don't do their due diligence on their end. Like, they don't ask the right questions, because sometimes, you have to be your own advocate in your cancer
Yes.
journey. And so if you
Yes.
don't have the motivation to like push through, then a lot of things can fall by the side, which can be detrimental to your outcome in the end.
That's true. There's a question here. A lot of people would like to know where the dollars go when they contribute to ACS with so much need. Can you give us an idea? And if you, maybe you can, maybe you can, but can you give us an idea of how that breaks down?
I'll say so 80% of the resources that we bring in go back to mission, and primarily where the majority of that money goes toward is research. As you know, research, we have actually like 50 former researchers that won the Nobel Prize. And so that's our
Mhm.
hallmark. That's how we make our biggest difference. Also, what we invest in is what we call hope lodges. And so if you ever want to know where our brick and mortar kind of like location is, similar to the Ronald McDonald House, well, we're
Mhm.
basically the Ronald McDonald House for adults. So if you're an adult and you're looking for support regarding cancer treatment, you don't want to pay exorbitant fees for hotel and food. Well, we provide you with free lodging as
Mhm.
long as you need help in order to get the treatment that you need. As you know, Mayo in Minnesota is one of the best hospitals on the planet, particularly regarding cancer. Well, we have people actually stay in our Hope Lodges while they're actually getting treatment at Mayo, and so it's a great benefit. We also give out transportation grants. Those grants go to our people who can't actually get back and forth to the treatment they need, and so those resources are used effectively as well. We do a lot of advocacy as well, something that I think is important when you want to kind of change levers, particularly regarding disparities. And so, for instance, I don't know if I reference biomarker testing. So what most people may not know about my biomarker testing is that it's a way of kind of realizing before you start getting treatment what you can handle and what you can't handle, what can respond well with your body in contrast to what may not. And so
Mhm.
that we actually had legislation passed this year in Minnesota because of the work of our ACS CAN affiliates, that now biomarker testing is actually covered by insurance. And so
Oh, that's good.
there's some states where it's not, and we're still doing work there. But for those states that are, it's helpful, because one of my worst concerns would be that you're getting chemo and you could have known beforehand if that chemo even would work or not, right?
Right.
And so those are the type of things we do just from a high level. That's kind of where the money goes at this particular time.
Okay, great, great. Um, so, from your perspective, and we kind of answer some of this, what are some common emotions and experiences that individuals facing cancer often share when navigating challenging
Fear,
phases of their journey?
yeah. Fear is
Yeah.
Fear is the first emotion. I was just downtown yesterday. We had a current NFL player, running back Alexander Madison, who was down in the Twin Cities area with us, meeting at a federally qualified health clinic. And while he was down there, we were able to kind of meet with some current patients. And so as we were going through the cancer center where they were being treated, I got to talk to a young lady, and she was so happy to see him, right?
Right.
A current Viking player that, I mean, we just beat the 49ers the night before, so everybody was like excited about being down there.
Yes. Yes.
But nevertheless, when I talked to her at the moment, she was smiling. She felt good, but then I started asking her like detailed questions, like, well, why'd you pick this location? What's going on? And she felt good at the moment, right? She felt positive, but she said, she's nervous, and
Yeah.
sometimes she's scared. And so that's something I think is pretty much universal when you hear that you have cancer. And so that emotion is something that it necessitates community, it necessitates support, it necessitates a lot of people desiring prayer and purpose, because whether it's fear of unknown, whether it's fear of can you pay the bills, whether it's fear of who's going to take care of your family, whether it's fear of the uncomfortable treatments you may get or the rumors you may have heard, like those are the emotion, the primary emotion that comes up. And I think that when you go through that process, people just don't know what's next. And in American Cancer Society, we also have our cancer.org and also a helpline that people can call so that you can get those support, different tools that you need as you go through the process, because community can be fostered in this process. You don't have to be alone. A lot of people, not just their caregiver, but they need an extended family in this process. And there are survivors who they can reach out to, but just to assuage that emotion and trust that, there's a light, there's an end to the tunnel in this process. For a lot of people, it means the world to alleviate.
Yes, it really does. And I know, you said when you touched on your board member and the clinical and the drug, the experimental drug, there's a whole, it's a whole other line, but I'd like to touch on a little bit in terms of as a minority, and you're working in an area where you're seeing, the inequities in care and access to care, et cetera. How do you think, and I know we're not doing that great with enrolling minorities in clinical trials. What is American Cancer Society doing to help in that area?
Yeah, so what we've done is we started our Diversity Institute, Cancer Institute. And so this focuses on diverse cancer researchers. We've connected with a lot of historically Black colleges and also women researchers with the hope of actually bringing them along the pipeline. A lot of people have not realistic notions about what it means to be a researcher and the challenge of going through that process. And not only once you make it through that, whether it being accepted to a school or making it through the doctoral process, or even getting to the point of studying, getting a lab, getting that paid for, and then moving forward. The ECS, what it's known for is starting funding early for scientists who are earlier in their careers. And so that's kind of our hallmark. And so we've made a pivot. We've made health equity a priority in our organization moving forward. We haven't made it a pillar because we felt like it should be a part of our entire structure moving forward, because the inequities have been here for so long. Unless we made it a part of our overall culture, that we really wouldn't move the lever at all. And so what we've done is tried to focus on students or potential scholars or doctors to help them who are diverse go through the system so that they could give a different perspective regarding the cancer research process.
Okay, because I still feel like the word health equity sometimes is misunderstood, and sometimes there doesn't seem to be a lot of funding for that on the ground level. Right. Are you aware of that? Are you seeing anything like that?
Oh yeah. So so you're trying to start.
No, I'm not trying to start a war. I'm just, what it is. I'm just out here as a survivor myself, and I'm just, seeing all these a lot of people talk about, access and inequities and all of this stuff, but when you knock on the door for funding, it's just not there. So I was just curious.
No, I mean, you're asking the right question, and this is a conversation that needs to transcend bipartisan politics. Like, we need to have a genuine conversation about it if we're going to really bring about genuine change in our country, right? And so I think at American Cancer Society, we realize that health equity and those social determinants of health haven't moved in a long time. Right. And so we're trying to engage companies so that they would be willing to help support. Obviously, our work is completely dependent upon our donors. And so what I've done as the market area lead of Minnesota is we develop a health equity subcommittee. And the lead of that committee is locally a gentleman named Bukata Hayes. He's the Chief Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Officer of Blue Cross in Minnesota. And so I'm working with him to try to figure out how not only to raise resources, obviously, but help trying to move some of those levers that are hindering, particularly around screening in our diverse or BIPOC communities. The money for a lot of people, some people think the money is there. It's just not going to where it should go. Other people don't think the money is there at all. But we found that there are resources out there. It's just indicative on us as the individual organizations they're trying to work through to produce those outcomes. And as always, that's always the biggest challenge, right? Since the beginning of most of these equity conversations, like what are the outcomes we're looking for? And so I think that's where the real conversation, whether back upstream or downstream, we need to figure out like what our ultimate goal is. Is it to simply say, okay, we check the box and then moving forward? Or is that we're actually impacting outcomes? And I think most people would agree about those outcomes, but it's just aligning those outcomes with whether it be companies or individual values and priorities as well. So yes, some companies have pulled back on some of their funding, but you see other companies that are stepping up big time in that area. So we've had a lot of support, but there's a lot more work we need to do, a lot more engagement we need to do as an organization, getting in contact with those companies, understanding what the real values are, and producing outcomes that will help the cancer disparities kind of reduce over time.
You use the word outcomes, and being from a nonprofit background yourself and myself too, I know how important it is to explain the outcomes to get the funding, right? So, companies want to know the ROI when they give you that donation. And one of the things I've always said is I don't know if those of us who are going after the funding, I don't know if we're making a good business case for diversity. And so I want to ask you, as you approach, funders, right? Mm-hmm. And you don't have to give me the minute details, but when you say, here's the outcome that we are proposing, you give us these money and here's what's going to be the ROI, here's what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. When we see this, we know we have got it. Mm-hmm. In terms of, health equity and access, how do you define outcomes to where a funder will say, okay, I'm giving you $500,000 and you're promising that you're going to get what?
Yeah, that was a good question. And so right now, what I've seen, and it's just broadly speaking within the space I'm in, is that where most of the resources seem to be going to in a health equity conversation goes towards screening. And so you can quantify screening data, right? We know how many people are in this particular area. We know their ethnicity, and we know how many have or have not been actually screened. So we can track clear quantitative outcomes in that regard. Right. The qualitative conversation we haven't even got to, we're not going to get to right now, but, yes. but as far as the numbers, we can measure that right now regarding screening. Now, when we're talking about some of the other outcomes, that's a whole different conversation. And I don't think that most of the health equity conversation has gotten there, because and just the unique thing about the way the health equity conversation is kind of growing, because historically it was primarily about BIPOC individuals. Now it's growing to children, LGBTQ plus individuals, is growing toward the rural area. And so now when we say health equity, it may mean something now a lot different from one conversation to the next. So we almost have to qualify when we say health equity, what that means from conversation to conversation.
Right, because the tent, you're right, the tent has gotten bigger, and honestly, rightfully so, because as we peered into health equity, it wasn't so much about BIPOC. It was, okay, older people, it was rural people, it was a lot. Yeah. Well, hopefully, rather than it being a negative, that even more money is released because there is a bigger need. So one question, I have a couple more questions for you. From your interactions with cancer survivors, what are some common themes or lessons that have emerged about resilience and hope during or after the treatment? We talk about fear as what's happening, but what are you seeing in terms of the resilience?
So when people come to me as the vice president of American Cancer Society, they've already gone through layers of the American Cancer Society services, and so I get a very different perspective than probably most people, like a nurse, an oncologist, or someone who's receiving people at a reception desk or from a phone call. And so by the time I'm having conversation with somebody who has cancer, they're pretty much informed about the challenges and opportunities that are ahead of them. I'm in kind of a privileged position, to be honest, because by the time they're having a conversation with me, it's probably at an event or maybe in a meeting. And so those conversations are a lot different, like I said, than the average person. And so by the time they're coming to me, they're excited, they're hopeful, they're encouraged. They understand steps that need to be put in place in order to find success and to go through their journey well. Most of them are not on an island. Most of them are not alone. But like I said, my perspective is a lot different than probably the average individual. And because of that, I see a lot of people who understand and soberly, they understand what's ahead of them. And they understand the steps they need to take in order to kind of get to the outcome that they want. And so in that regard, I think I've seen a lot of resilience, determination. I think what's most unique is for the cancer survivors, I see they're diligent about moving forward. Being an advocate for the fight has been something that's been profound for me. So not only that, right, but it's also the people who've lost loved ones due to cancer, and just to see their tenacity about being an advocate, about supporting. And I think that's the one thing that surprises me the most, that, I've met a lot of people who have loved ones who've passed away, but they're on the front lines. They're helping read resources. They're helping spread the message. They're helping making connections. They're helping to advocate, lobby. They're doing their due diligence, despite the fact that their loved one is gone, because most of those people, they don't want their experience to be someone else's, and they're fighters. And so that's the most unique thing I think I've seen about those people who have gone through the cancer fight and who have developed this kind of tenacity in the process.
Awesome. I as you were talking, I'm thinking, as a pastor, right? So you wear these two hats. You're a pastor and you work with the American Cancer Society. How do you handle that cancer patient who said, I'm going to go strictly faith. I am not going to go with the treatments. I want to pray for my healing, and this is what I believe. How do you reconcile that?
Well, I guess first of all, it depends. I'd have to ask them who their pastor is, right? I have that, just so you know. I have that conversation. But from being a pastor, I've been in pastoral ministry for almost 23 years, and I've seen people healed. I've seen it. I've seen the majority of people not. I've seen young people go away from cancer, and I've seen older people who survived, right? And because of the wisdom of God, it's hard to say exactly how he's going to function in each situation. And what I've tried to do is I tried to be there for them, to stay connected to them, regardless of where they are in the spectrum of faith. There are sometimes people who, like, they're on the mountaintop, and I try to be there with them on the mountaintop. But if they happen to kind of fall in the valley, like, I try to stay there with them as well. And so as a pastor, my job is simply just to lead to the shepherd. And so in that regard, if they ask for counsel, if they ask for wisdom, if they ask for advice, I'd give it to them, right? I'd tell them what the steps are, what they need to do in order to move forward. But if they're not there at that particular time, I don't force them there, because I know that's not going to have any positive outcome on what they really want. Some people, let's just be brutally honest, some people only want a miracle in this process. They don't want to take medicine. They don't want the outcome. They don't want surgeries that are prescribed by academia or doctors. And so for those people, I'm there for them as well. Like, they're living, they have agency, they can make their own decision. And if that conversation happens to come up where they're like, okay, it doesn't seem like things are going the way I thought they were go, and then I'm there to provide support and wisdom as well. And so that's just me as a pastor, not as a vice president or even as a dad. That's kind of how I handle that situation.
Wow. Anthony, what would you say to as I'm going to give you this last word here? Thank you so much, of course, for being here. Just it's been a very inspiring and encouraging talk. Let's see here. Advocacy is a powerful source of purpose and resilience. What would you say to anyone right now, just hearing that news, your test came back positive for cancer? What would be that from both the pastor's head and the ACS's head? What could you say to that person who's watching this show and is now getting ready to deal with all of what that comes with?
That you're not alone. I think that's the first thing most people feel, fear and loneliness. And I think that what's helpful is to know that there are other people who have been through what you're going through, who will go through what you're going through. And some people go through it well. They go through it in an amazing way. And so regardless of what emotions an individual feels, whether it's denial, acceptance, like they're not alone. And to know that you're not alone helps you feel connected, like you're part of something bigger than yourself, because you are. In our culture, sometimes we get very individualistic regarding our thoughts, our actions, and we think that individualism is intrinsic to us as humans, but it's absolutely not. We're a part of something bigger. And so right now, we know since the beginning of the American Cancer Society, cancer mortality rate has dropped 33%. And so we're making gains. And regardless of how you kind of lean on our current president administration, the cancer moonshot goal is to get the number to 50%, right? I think it's by 2030. And so we've made strides in the fight against cancer. So it's not a death sentence in itself. But worst case scenario, absolute worst case scenario that it is, right? That's why you have faith, right? There's life. We believe as Christians that there's life beyond the grave. And so that doesn't mean it's still a death sentence. We're still have opportunity to be impactful, to live a meaningful life, to live a full life, whether that be 1 year or 30 more years. And so that's the thing about in my faith in Christianity, that regardless of how I feel, what I'm going through, there's an ultimate end where it's a good ending. And so I'm just here to help those people who are on their journey, whether it be they're believers or not, to try to help them make it through to get to the other side. Do I have hopes regarding how they end the journey? Absolutely. But until that point, I'm here to provide support and raise resources and try to make a change in the fight against cancer.
Anthony, we've done about 80 plus of these TTalks. So you're my first pastor, and you happen to be a pastor who's a VP at the American Cancer Society. So for me, it was very special. As a person of faith, for me, when I was diagnosed, my faith really played a huge part. Of course, I did the traditional stuff too, the standard of care, but my faith really was what kept me anchored. And so I just really appreciate your perspective. I thank you so much for sharing it, for being bold about the faith part, as well as, being measured with, what the scientific parts are as well. We will definitely lift up your sister and the rest of your family, praying for great outcomes. And I just really want to thank you for being here today. And so the audience thanks you as well. Yeah. And so I'm just going to say bye to our audience right now. And then Anthony, I'll just talk with you for another 30 seconds. Take care, guys. I'll see you guys tomorrow.